So, where do we go from here? Recently, I've done a lot of videos about driving for Uber and Lyft, being an Uber and Lyft driver. And I'm going to be honest, as most of you may have noticed, a lot of these videos have been pretty negative. Basically, leaning upon the side of not driving for tons of different reasons I've outlined logistically, financially, legally, insurance wise, vehicle wise, the accounting that goes behind it. Basically, ride sharing is not what it used to be. And I've done so many videos about this. You can see the comments on those videos too. A lot of drivers agree. And like I said, and I think it's always important to say this before I kind of divulge into this, that I find 25% of drivers love driving for Uber and Lyft. 75% don't. Yes, Uber and Lyft is not perfect, but there are some good parts to it. I will say that. Of course, the low barrier to entry, flexible schedule, as we all know, instant cash outs. But with that being said, and I think trying to move forward and looking ahead, because this is something I always like to think about is, okay, ride sharing, at least right now, is not the best. But let's say as we look forward to like the next few years or 5 years or whatever, of course, certain things are popping up, like self-driving cars, AI, et cetera, et cetera. And so I want to kind of think about, well, what would be the solution for a lot of the drivers out there who are just super frustrated, who are quitting Lyft and Uber? What would actually solve the issue that a lot of drivers have? And I think I've boiled it down to two main things. I think these are the two things right now that drivers really need to can either continue driving or to maybe start driving. I know some people who said, hey, Mark, I'm going to start driving for Uber and Lyft, and I watched your videos and now I'm not, right? I think it's the two P's, and that's pay and protection. Breaking everything down, looking at all my past videos. I've, read hundreds of articles looking at the analytics of being a rideshare driver. I've interviewed hundreds of drivers. I've seen hundreds of comments. Maybe at this point, maybe even now over 1,000 comments or potentially thousands of comments because I get so many on this channel. And sometimes it's tough to keep up, but I try as best I can. And honestly, I think that's what it comes down to. So let's get into it. This is the way I think moving forward, Uber and Lyft can really encourage their drivers to continue driving and to keep drivers on longer and to keep them happier, right? I can do a video about this in the future. I don't know what the customer acquisition cost is for Uber and Lyft, or excuse me, the driver acquisition cost. I'm not sure if it would be high or low. My guess would be maybe a little bit high. In case you don't know what that means is, what is the average cost when you factor in marketing, logistics, budgeting, et cetera, for Uber and Lyft to acquire a new driver? For most companies, and this is a big thing that plays in this video, for most companies, it is typically way more expensive to get a new employee than to keep an old employee. Now, granted, I've not really seen the analytics too much on this. I'm probably going to do another video about this in depth, so I want to save that for that video. But for most companies, I remember learning, there are some companies that, like, I remember the accounting firm I used to work at way back in the day, which is called Deloitte, one of the big four accounting firms. I think they told me that the average cost of training a new employee, hiring, all this kind of stuff was something around like $20K. It was something way higher than you think. Now for Uber and Lyft, very different than accounting. The barrier to entry is a lot lower. You don't need a degree, all these different things. So I will say this a little bit different, but even still, typically for most companies, they're going to spend way more money trying to acquire a new driver in this case, as opposed to keeping the old drivers. So how do they do that? And like I said, the two P's I think are pay and protection. So getting into that, one, of course, the pay. This is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I've done videos, and I've said this in those videos, of like 5 reasons why I quit driving for Uber and Lyft. 5 reasons why most drivers are quitting as well, like to show not just my own perspective, but other drivers' perspectives. I've done videos about all the negative things, and the biggest thing, as you can imagine for a lot of drivers, is the pay. It is crazy right now that, one, drivers are making way less than ever before. And not even just way less, but in some cases, and way less than it was the bottom line, but they're not making any much more. There's not like a point on the horizon that we think, oh, in 5 years, the pay is going to be bumped up, right? And I said this before in other videos. When I first started driving, my first ride was in January of 2015. When people would ask me, because that was kind of the infancy days of Uber and Lyft, people would say, well, Mark, how much money do you make as a driver? And I'd say, on average, 20 to 25 an hour. Now, going to this video almost 10 years later, my average amount when people ask me is, well, 20 to 25 an hour. So one, the pay's not getting any better, it's getting worse. And especially with inflation, which I'm going to get to in a second. Second thing is Uber and Lyft is now taking out more money. Back in the day, they took out a hard 20%. I personally thought that was fair. I don't have to do any work. I turn on the app whenever I want. It finds me all the riders. I don't do anything. It tells me where to go, how to go. It tells me, especially now, this didn't exist back in the day, but now, of course, they tell you exactly how much money you might make on this ride. You can choose to accept it or not. Back in the day, you didn't have that, but even still, I was like, hey, I make $100, 20 of that goes to Lyft and Uber. I bring home 80. That makes sense. I don't have to do anything. I just hit the app. It does everything for me, right? No big deal. Now, I know of a lot of drivers, and it's weird how it depends on area to area, and it fluctuates, saying that Uber and Lyft is now taking out 40% or 50% or 60%, and it depends upon the area. I think one driver, I think it was in Miami, was saying that they took out it almost seemed like even close to 70%, which almost seemed like flip-flopped from the way it was before. So the second thing when it comes to pay, Uber and Lyft is taking out way more. The third thing now, of course, you're an independent contractor. So that does not include taxes and everything. And then the fourth thing, it does not include maintenance, right? At the fact that you have to pay for gas. Gas is going up. You have to get more oil changes. You have to, my brother who actually drives for Lyft and Uber, or used to drive actually for Lyft, just had to get his brakes replaced because of how much he was driving. And the mechanic kind of said, yeah, I got to be honest, I can see the wear and tear, that you put way more wear and tear on your car. So now I have to get new brakes. And I mean, if you think about it, even though you're driving a lot, and I said this before in other videos, it's ironic and almost this paradox that the more you drive, the more you have to spend in maintenance, right? When I used to bartend, if I bartend more, I'd make more money. Would not think anything of it. If I post more YouTube videos, I make more money. But as a Lyft and Uber driver, you have to realize, oh yeah, the more I drive, the more I also have to spend, and that definitely still lowers your bottom line. And the fifth thing, overall with the pay, is inflation, right? Like I said, gas is going up. The oil changes on your car going up. All these maintenance aspects are going up, and all these little things are increasing so much so that a lot of drivers are saying the pay is just not what it used to be. Yes, the flexible schedule, great. The instant cash outs, great. The fact that I can, join with low barrier to entry. I've said this before in other videos. I think it's important to look at both sides as in a positive way. I've seen some jobs saying, hey, you need a bachelor's degree in accounting, which I have. You need a bachelor's degree in accounting. You start at 20 an hour as a bookkeeper, or 25 an hour as a bookkeeper, or maybe an internal auditor or whatever. Yet I could make that same amount being a Lyft and Uber driver, right? With no degree, no 4-year college thing I have to do. I don't have to worry about student loans, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some benefits to Lyft and Uber, but the pay is just not what it used to be. And I think for Uber and Lyft to keep their drivers and improve this current situation, they definitely need to pay their drivers significantly more and take out way less. That I think is the big thing, because it still blows my mind. I didn't realize this, I think, until like a month or 2 months ago when I was, doing more research, that wow, back in the day, my average amount, like I said, I know I'm driving this point home, but back in the day, the average amount I say most drivers would make is 20 to 25 an hour. That's not changed. It's still, in my opinion, on average, 20 to 25 an hour for most drivers. Yet inflation's higher, and Uber Lyft's taking out a bigger cut. I mean, it's just getting a little ridiculous. You know what I mean? And the almighty dollar is really the big thing. I mean, for most drivers, yes, there are some drivers out there, and I've met actually a good amount, who do Lyft and Uber just for fun. A lot of them actually retired, saying, hey, on a Friday night, rather than stay in the house and be alone, I can go out, meet new people, maybe make some side cash for my grandson or granddaughter, maybe just put it away. But honestly, I just like doing Lyft and Uber, and I've met people like that. But those I'd say are about 3% or maybe 2% or maybe even 1% of drivers. 99% of drivers are like, hey, I'm doing this to make money. I need this money for ends meet, to put food on the table, for bills, for paying off debt, whatever the case is. The pay, by far the biggest thing that's just gotten significantly worse. And honestly, I don't know how it's going to get any better. I know David Reisher, who's the new CEO of Lyft, has done certain things to improve the pay with Lyft drivers, and there have been some analytics to show that. So I have to give credit where credit's due. David Reisher has been trying to prove that. Uber, I don't know, I feel like Uber's still Uber. I feel like Lyft is the only company I've seen right now, if I had to compare Uber to Lyft, that's genuinely at least trying to do what they can. And I have no affiliation with either company, by the way, but that's trying to do what they can to improve it, but we still have a long way to go. Now, the second P is protection. This is one that was interesting about protection is, I think when most drivers think about the negative aspects of driving, they think pay. How much am I getting paid? My income, how much money's in my account? And then protection is kind of on the wayside. They don't really think about, they're like, protection, right? A big thing, though, that I've noticed that didn't really exist before is there's been a lot more incidents of things with insurance claims, deactivation. There's a lot of logistical things when it comes to being a rideshare driver that can, for lack of a better phrase, really screw you up. And I think back in the day, for better or for worse, I think ridesharing was so new. I think the government didn't really know how to look at it. I think state legislation didn't really know how to look at it. I think insurance companies didn't really know how to look at it. It was kind of vague. It's like, okay, well, are you a commercial driver or not? Is your car a personal vehicle or a private vehicle? Are you, things were very, very vague. Now, which is kind of bittersweet, things are becoming more cut and dry, right? As we all know, Uber and Lyft is now a staple in our society. You could say what you want about Uber and Lyft being good or bad, definitely debatable. But I mean, if you think about it, if Uber and Lyft went away tomorrow, I think it would be the biggest ripple effect. I think it's a very underrated industry. There's a lot of people saying, hey, I don't have a car. I use Uber and Lyft and Uber to get to and from work, right? I use it because, I'm disabled or I'm elderly and I can't drive. And this allows me to get to point A to point B. It allows me to go and get groceries if I need to. There's people using it, of course, going out on a Friday and Saturday night. They want to be responsible. They don't want to be drinking and driving. They want to be able to get to and from their venue, being responsible, right? There's a lot of benefits to Lyft and Uber. Parking. I mean, here in LA, it's funny that a lot of times it's cheaper to take a Lyft and Uber, even if I'm not drinking, than to drive because parking is a nightmare. And of course, if I get a parking ticket, that's way more money I have to spend on top of me paying for parking, but it expired, there's weird terms and blah, 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 right? So Lyft and Uber's had a massive ripple effect on our society. And so now things seem to be, in a bittersweet way, coming back to this, a bit more in an odd way cut and dry, but in a weirder way. And what I mean is now insurance companies know about Lyft and Uber. Now different organizations, legislation, they understand more about what Lyft and Uber is. Yet, if anything, I believe, if I had to, go look at both sides, that there's less protection now for drivers than ever before. I feel like back in the day, if I got into an accident and I was driving for Lyft and Uber, my insurance company could probably say, it's tough to say, right? Remember, insurance companies will use any excuse they can to not pay you as a driver. I feel like back in the day, if I got into an accident and I told them what happened, I feel like at least they'd be like, all right, well, this Uber thing, this Lyft thing, you were driving for them, well, let's talk about it, blah, blah, blah. Now, a lot of insurance companies claim and state, look, if you don't tell us you're driving for Lyft and Uber and you get into an accident, it's on you because you didn't tell us. This is why I suggest to a lot of drivers, make sure you get rideshare insurance just to cover you. However, I've heard a lot of drivers, because remember, in case you didn't know, and this is a whole other subject for a whole other video, Uber and Lyft has your own kind of insurance policies, and there's different phases of it. There's phase, I think, 0, 1, 2, and 3, I believe. There's technically 4 phases where depending on the stage of the ride that you're at, if you get into an accident or something happens, there's certain coverages. And this depends whether, let's say, you are driving to pick somebody up. If, let's say, you're driving with somebody in your car and you're currently doing an active ride, there's different stages and different phases when it comes to the legal aspects of being covered by these insurance policies. But it is super, super annoying and unfortunate that a lot of drivers say, hey, I was driving for Lyft and Uber. They told me they were going to cover me. They did not. I had no protection. Now I'm basically screwed, right? And when it comes to insurance companies now, they're going to potentially not cover you if you don't tell them. This is why I suggest, like I said, make sure you get rideshare insurance. And in addition to, let's say if you sign up for insurance, like say you get Joe Schmo's insurance, so you go with, Geico or Progressive or whatever, and one of the first questions they now ask you is, are you driving for Lyft and Uber or rideshare or taxi-like service, right? This is another big thing. And as you can imagine, like I was talking about with the pay before, it's ironic now that not only is the pay lower and all these kind of things like I just talked about earlier, but now you have to spend more money because of this protection. And then there are certain states now that are employing different policies, like Portland, Oregon. I did a video about the requirements, how you have to be registered as an actual business, which is a whole thing. I believe it is free. Who knows if that changes, but that's a very interesting thing. I know different places you need like a TNC license or whatever. I don't know, but there's a lot going on, right? And so I think it's a very, very tricky arena right now when it comes to the protection that a lot of drivers don't think about. And of course, other things, you're an independent contractor, which means you need health insurance. If you've never shopped for health insurance, it's a nightmare. As we all know, health insurance in America is definitely a heated debate, but So annoying to deal with, especially as an independent contractor. You don't really have benefits. Yes, this is changing a little bit. After Prop 22 here in California, there is like something when it comes to health insurance. I can't remember the exact terms, but that's a whole thing in itself. I know a lot of drivers are not happy about that. But then on top of all this too, you're talking about potential incidents in the car. Yes, there are a lot of incidents that happen to passengers, but also to drivers as well. This is why I suggest make sure you have a dash cam that records both outside your vehicle in case an accident happens, but also inside your vehicle. We hear all the time of different assaults, of sexual assault, just in general. And as a driver, you're not being more and more worried. Am I going to feel safe or comfortable, right? We've probably seen these videos go viral too of people doing really messed up things and Lyft and Ubers. And what's tough is usually somehow the driver gets blamed for it, and Uber and Lyft will side with the passenger, not with the driver. Now, that's not always true, but the bigger thing now on top of that tends to happen is deactivation. I've done some videos about this. This is becoming more prevalent, and I don't really know why, or maybe I'm just getting more traffic thrown my way and more comments about it because I've been mentioning it more and more in different videos, that for a lot of drivers, they're now worried because if, let's say you go and drive, you pick up a passenger, you have that dash cam footage, the passenger's very, very drunk, and they're just being unreasonable. I've heard of stories, for example, and just kind of like giving an example or kind of taking bits and pieces of, let's say, a passenger being drunk, and they're like, hey, I really want to go to McDonald's. Can you go through the drive-thru? And the driver's like, no, sorry. The drive-thru's wicked long. I just want to bring you home. It's kind of late, like, because in case you didn't know, if you're just watching this for fun, for a lot of drivers, you basically make like pennies waiting that drive-thru. And then your car gets messy. It smells like McDonald's. People leave food everywhere, and it's a hassle, right? And I've heard of stories of, like, say, drivers being like, no, I'm not going to bring you to McDonald's. I'm just going to bring you home. And then the passenger, to retaliate, contacts Lyft and Uber and says, hey, my driver was drunk. He was driving drunk. And then Uber Lyft says, whoa, he was driving drunk. Then they deactivate your account, meaning you can't drive. Meaning, let's say if you're driving full time and you're expecting that income, you're expecting to wake up and drive, you wake up and you get this weird alert on your phone saying, sorry, your account's been deactivated. We're investigating an issue. Now, even if you have that dash cam footage, which again is helpful, and you submit it to Lyft and Uber, there still has to be this investigation process. It could take a day, it could take a week, it could take 2 weeks. And I've had drivers tell me they got deactivated for, let's say, 2 weeks. And at the end of that deactivation, Uber Lyft contacted them saying, hey, we're sorry. We realized you were right. The passenger was in the wrong. You can drive again. And you're like, cool, but I just missed out on 2 weeks of work. You have pretty much no protection when something like that happens. There was one area, I can't remember if it was Michigan or Minnesota. Maybe it was Minnesota. I can't remember that. There was actually, or maybe it was Chicago. One of those three, I believe. I don't know, I may be wrong, where they were actually putting forth something in legislation where if you got wrongfully deactivated, Uber and Lyft would have to retroactively give you that money back. So let's say if on average you make $500 a week, I'm just making this up, and Uber and Lyft deactivated you and then reactivated you after a week and realized, hey, you know what? You're actually right. That passenger was in the wrong. They'd have to back pay you $500 because you missed out on being able to drive. And unfortunately, I think it got shut down, which is super annoying. But I'm like, you know what? That is something that I think would be a good policy, right? And I think this does kind of then start kind of touching upon the whole aspect of having a Lyft and Uber union or ride-sharing union. I know when I say that, it's interesting because a lot of people get scared or get like, oh my God, but I think that could actually be a good policy or something to explore. Definitely that's opening up Pandora's box, even mentioning union, right? But there's a lot of things going on right now where Uber and Lyft drivers just don't feel like they're protected, whether it comes to ride sharing, insurance and insurance policies. You know, I've even had people tell me that they got ride share insurance and it still didn't cover them. And there's a whole issue, right? Granted, insurance companies can be very annoying, right? But things like deactivation, there's just not a lot of protection for drivers, making the risk versus reward analysis just not there. That you're like, okay, I'm going to go out and drive. Yeah, there's some benefits to driving, but for a lot of drivers, especially now, they're saying, okay, not only is the pay so low and inflation is so high, and I'm doing all these things when it comes to driving, I'm not making that much money. Uber and Lyft taking out a bigger cut, but now on top of that, the protection seems to be almost worse, where if something goes wrong with a passenger, if something goes wrong with someone attacking me, if something goes wrong when it comes to getting into an accident, I'm just not protected. I'm not covered. Uber and Lyft kind of leaves me, hanging high and dry, and I'm just now on my own, isolated with all this debt that I now have to pay off because Uber and Lyft did nothing for me, and they're siding with the passenger. is getting a lot worse. And so I think to make things better and to improve things, and like I said, I think for Lyft and Uber, I'll probably do a video about this in the future, for them to keep drivers on, which could potentially lower their driver acquisition cost, improving the pay and improving the protection are the two biggest ways to go.